I never imagined the surveillance skills I used to protect government secrets would one day track my future son-in-law inside the home I built with blood and sweat. Everyone sees a saint, but I see a predator eyeing my biometric safe. He thinks I am just a frail widower, a target for after the wedding. He is wrong. When my daughter handed me a note at the altar, I knew the bloodshed was about to begin. My name is John Williams. If you looked up my tax returns from the last 5 years, you would see a man who lives a modest, quiet life in the rainy suburbs of Seattle. You would see a widower, 48 years old, who spends his days tending to a rain-soaked garden and tinkering with vintage radios. To my neighbors, I am the friendly, slightly boring man who always has a wave for the postman, but never quite invites anyone inside for a beer. They think I am a freelance software consultant who got lucky with some investments in the early 2000s. That is the version of John Williams I created. It is a carefully constructed firewall designed to protect the only thing in this world that matters to me, my daughter Emily. They do not know about Aegis Dynamics. They do not know that 10 years ago I wrote the encryption protocols that currently secure 3 major national banks and at least 2 government intelligence agencies. When I sold the company and vanished into anonymity, I did it for Emily. I wanted her to have a father, not a headline. I wanted her to be loved for who she was, not for the 9 zeros sitting in offshore trust funds she knows nothing about. I built this life to be a sanctuary. But sanctuaries are fragile things when you invite the devil in for dinner. It started on a Tuesday evening in November. The Seattle rain was hammering against the slate roof of our Victorian home, a rhythmic drumming that usually soothed me. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a stew when I heard the front door open. The sound of Emily's laughter drifted down the hallway, bright and infectious. It was a sound that usually made my chest swell with warmth, but tonight there was another sound accompanying it, a deep, smooth baritone voice. "Dad, we're home," Emily called out. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked into the foyer. There they stood. Emily, shaking rain from her umbrella, her cheeks flushed with the kind of happiness that makes a parent's heart ache with protectiveness. And beside her, Daniel Thorne. I had seen photos, of course. Emily had been seeing him for 3 months, and in the digital age, no father resists a quick background check. But seeing him in the flesh was different. He was 30 years old, though he carried himself with the gravitas of a man much older. He was undeniably handsome, with the sort of jawline that cuts glass, and eyes that were a warm, inviting shade of hazel. He wore a charcoal wool coat that fit him impeccably, likely tailored, though he wore it with a casual ease that suggested he didn't care about such things. "Mr. Williams," he said, stepping forward and extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry and assured. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. Emily talks about you as if you hung the moon." "John is fine," I said, keeping my face neutral. "And Emily tends to exaggerate." "I don't think so," Daniel smiled. It was a perfect smile. Too perfect. The kind of smile you practice in a mirror until the muscle memory is flawless. "She told me you rebuilt this place yourself. It's magnificent." He wasn't looking at me when he said it. His eyes were doing a quick, sweeping scan of the foyer. Most guests look at the people. Daniel looked at the perimeter. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long on the sensors of the alarm system by the door, then swept up to the high, vaulted ceiling. "Come on, let me take your coats," Emily said, beaming. "Daniel, you have to see the living room. Dad found this incredible fireplace mantel from an old estate in Portland." As we moved into the living room, I fell back a step, observing. This was my territory. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every draft, every shadow. I watched Daniel move through my space. He didn't walk like a guest who was afraid of knocking things over. He walked like a predator, assessing a new hunting ground. We sat down for drinks before dinner. Emily poured wine while Daniel wandered toward the bookshelf in the corner. It was a dusty, cluttered corner that I rarely organized. Tucked away on a lower shelf behind some old encyclopedias was a small, unassuming jade statue I had picked up in Macau 20 years ago. It looked like cheap tourist junk to the untrained eye. Ming Dynasty? Daniel asked, his voice low. He wasn't touching it, just leaning in his hands, clasped behind his back. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. Just a trinket, I lied, sipping my water. Picked it up at a flea market. Daniel turned to me, his expression shifting into a mask of polite embarrassment. Ah, forgive me. I have a bit of an interest in art history. It has the distinct carving style of the mid-period. But of course, a flea market find is a flea market find. He knew. He absolutely knew it was worth more than $200,000, and he had spotted it in a shadowed corner within 5 minutes of entering the house. A charity worker for a non-profit called Hope Horizon should not have the eye of a high-end fence. Tell me about your work, Daniel, I said, steering the conversation as we moved to the dining table. Emily says you save the world for a living. Daniel chuckled, a modest, self-deprecating sound. Hardly. We just try to get resources to where they are needed most. Clean water initiatives in Sudan, education programs in Laos. It is rewarding work, but exhausting. The travel can be brutal. He's being modest, Dad, Emily chimed in, placing a hand on Daniel's arm. He personally negotiates with local warlords to get supply trucks through. He's amazing. I watched him preen under her praise. He didn't deflect it. He absorbed it. He looked at Emily, with a gaze that seemed filled with adoration, but I saw the mechanics of it. He would hold eye contact for exactly the right amount of time, then offer a soft, reassuring nod. It was a performance. I had seen similar performances in boardrooms, when corporate spies tried to charm their way into a merger. As we ate, the conversation shifted back to the house. I must say, John, Daniel said, cutting his steak with precise, surgical movements. I am impressed by the structural integrity of this place. Renovating these old Seattle craftsmen can be a nightmare with the foundation settling. Did you reinforce the basement? A bit, I said vaguely. Just standard concrete pouring. And the security, Daniel gestured with his fork toward the keypad on the wall near the kitchen entrance. It was a standard plastic Honeywell unit from the late 90s. It is charmingly retro. Does it still connect to a monitoring station, or is it just a local alarm? It makes a loud noise if someone breaks a window, I said, playing the part of the technological dinosaur. That's about all I need. I'm not guarding the crown jewels here. Daniel laughed, but his eyes did not. They remained fixed on me, cold and calculating. Of course. But in a secluded area like this with a daughter, one can never be too careful. I would be happy to have my guys come take a look at it. Update you to a smart system, on the house, of course. His guys? I thought. A charity director has guys for security installation? I appreciate the offer, I said, but I like my old buttons. I don't trust the cloud. Fair enough, Daniel said, taking a sip of wine. Privacy is a rare luxury these days. The way he said privacy sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't talking about data. He was talking about isolation. He was measuring how alone we were out here. The dinner concluded, and they moved to the sofa to look at some of Emily's art portfolios. I stayed in the kitchen to clean up, watching them through the reflection in the oven glass. I saw Daniel whisper something in Emily's ear, and she giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. It looked like a scene from a romantic movie. But then, as Emily looked down at her sketches, Daniel's face changed. The warmth evaporated instantly. He lifted his head and looked directly at the biometric lock on my study door across the hall. It was a subtle lock designed to look like a simple fingerprint pad, but he clocked it. His eyes narrowed, analyzing the make, the model, the likely encryption level. He wasn't looking at it with curiosity. He was looking at it with hunger. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he snapped his head toward the kitchen. In a split second, the warm, charming mask was back in place. He smiled at me, raising his wineglass in a silent toast. My stomach churned. This was not a boyfriend. This was an infiltrator. The weeks that followed were a blur of calculated intrusion. Daniel was everywhere. He was always stopping by to drop off flowers for Emily, or to bring me a specific blend of coffee he thought I might like. He was weaving himself into the fabric of our lives with terrifying efficiency. Then came the blow. It was a Sunday afternoon just 3 months after that first dinner. The rain had stopped for once, leaving the sky a bruised purple. Emily called me into the living room. She was shaking, her eyes wide and wet with tears. Daniel was standing beside her, holding her hand with both of his. "Dad," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We have news." I knew it before she said it. I saw the ring, a vintage diamond, tasteful, likely expensive. "Daniel proposed," she gasped, finally, letting the smile break through. "We're getting married." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Married," I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my skin. "That is fast. You have only known each other for a season." "I know, sir," Daniel interjected, stepping forward. His tone was apologetic, respectful. "And I know how this looks. I wanted to ask your permission first, truly. But the timeline, it's out of my hands." "What timeline?" I asked, my voice hardening slightly. "The foundation," Daniel sighed, looking burdened. "I have been reassigned to oversee a critical project in Southeast Asia. I leave in 6 weeks. It is a 3-year deployment. I couldn't imagine leaving Emily behind, and we can't get her a spousal visa unless we are legally married." "He wants me to go with him, Dad," Emily said, squeezing his hand. "Imagine traveling the world helping people." "It's everything I've ever wanted." I looked at my daughter. She was 22 years old. She was an artist, a dreamer. She saw the world in colors and brushstrokes. She did not see the shark standing next to her in a cashmere sweater. She did not see that visa issues was the oldest rush tactic in the book. 6 weeks, I repeated. That is not enough time to plan a wedding. "We'll keep it small," Daniel insisted. "Intimate. Just family and close friends. Here at the house. This place means so much to Emily. It would be the perfect venue." Of course. He wanted the wedding here. He wanted access. He wanted to be inside the perimeter for days, unsupervised, amidst the chaos of catering and florists. "Please, Daddy." Emily looked at me with those big, hopeful eyes. "I know it's sudden, but I love him. He's the one." I looked at Daniel. He was watching me with that same calm, challenging expression. He knew I couldn't say no. If I forbade it, I would be the villain. I would be the controlling father standing in the way of true love and noble charity work. He had checkmated me emotionally. "If it makes you happy, Em," I said softly, stepping forward to hug her. "Then I am happy." Over her shoulder, my eyes locked with Daniel's. He didn't smile this time. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was a declaration of war. That night, after the celebrations had died down and Emily had gone to sleep dreaming of wedding dresses and tropical travels, I did not go to bed. I went to my study. I locked the door and placed my hand on the biometric scanner. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a hiss. Inside the room was not the dusty library of a retired freelancer. Walls of monitors hummed to life. Server racks blinked in the darkness. I sat down at my terminal, the glow of the screens reflecting in my glasses. I had spent 10 years being John Williams the gardener, the quiet neighbor. But John Williams was not enough to stop a man like Daniel Thorne. I typed in a command string I hadn't used since the day I sold Aegis Dynamics. Execute, protocol, watchtower. Target, Thorne Daniel surveillance level, max. "You made a mistake, son," I whispered to the empty room as the code began to scroll down the screen, like digital rain. "You think you found a sheep, but you just walked into the wolf's den." I pulled a small, dusty box from the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were microcameras the size of pinheads and audio bugs that could pick up a heartbeat from across a room. The wedding was in 6 weeks. That gave me 42 days to deconstruct his life layer by layer. I would let him think he was winning. I would let him think I was the feeble old man he took me for. I would smile at the rehearsal dinner and shake his hand. But I would be watching. And if he hurt a single hair on Emily's head, he would learn that some firewalls burn back. The invasion of my home did not happen with a battering ram or a shattered window. It happened with a smile, a bottle of expensive scotch, and a relentless, suffocating helpfulness. In the weeks following the engagement announcement, Daniel Thorne became a permanent fixture in my house. He was there for breakfast, he was there for dinner, and he was there on weekends, always with his sleeves rolled up, eager to assist the future father-in-law he clearly viewed as a relic of a bygone era. I played my part to perfection. I adopted the posture of a man whose best years were behind him. I let my shoulders slump. I squinted at simple text messages, as if the technology baffled me. When Daniel spoke about cloud computing or blockchain during dinner, I would nod vaguely and ask if that had anything to do with the Weather Channel. It was a humiliation to my professional pride, considering I had written the foundational code for some of the very systems he referenced, but it was necessary. I needed him to underestimate me. I needed him to think the fortress was unguarded. The primary theater of our silent war was my study. It was the only room in the house I kept locked, a habit I explained away as an old man's need for privacy to organize his tax papers and memoirs. In reality, behind the mahogany panels and the rows of dusty history books, I kept the physical backups of the Aegis Dynamics server architecture. These were blueprints for cybersecurity grids that foreign governments would pay 9 figures to acquire. Daniel sensed the importance of that room. I could feel his curiosity radiating off him like heat. One rainy Tuesday, he made his move. I was in the kitchen struggling with a jar of pickles, another calculated act of frailty, when he strolled in. "John," he said, his voice smooth and solicitous. "I noticed the hallway outside your study is getting a bit cluttered with boxes. Since the wedding florist is coming tomorrow to do a site survey, would you like me to help you move some things? Maybe organize that office of yours? I know how overwhelming paperwork can get." "Oh, you are too kind, Daniel," I replied, finally, popping the jar lid with a feigned gasp of effort. "But it is a mess in there. Just old receipts and sentimental junk. I would be embarrassed to let you see it." "Nonsense," he insisted, resting a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a shackle. "We are family now. Let me take the load off you. You look tired." I allowed him to persuade me. I led him to the study, fumbling with my keys for a solid minute, before unlocking the door. As we entered, I watched his eyes. They did not look at the boxes of books I had staged near the door. They darted immediately to the desk, to the safe in the corner, and to the computer terminal. "Here," I said, gesturing to a stack of innocent magazines. "If we could just move these to the garage." As we worked, I set the trap. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and sighed loudly. "Blast this thing," I muttered. I can never remember the password for the Wi-Fi administrator account. I wrote it down somewhere. I opened the top drawer, rummaged around, and pulled out a bright yellow sticky note. I held it up, squinting at it, ensuring Daniel had a clear line of sight. On it, written in bold marker, was a string of characters: guest access 2026. It was a dummy password one that would grant access to a quarantined segment of my network, a digital sandbox I had built specifically to monitor intruders. "Ah, there it is," I said, sticking the note onto the corner of my monitor. "I will just leave it here so I do not lose it again." I saw the corner of Daniel's mouth twitch. He had logged it. 10 minutes later, I feigned a coughing fit. "I need some water," I wheezed. "Daniel, would you mind finishing up with this box? I will be right back." "Take your time, John," he said. "I will handle everything." I left the room, closing the door, but not latching it. I walked down the hall, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I made a show of clattering cups in the kitchen, ensuring he could hear I was occupied. Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone and accessed the hidden camera feed from the study. Daniel did not continue packing boxes. The moment my footsteps faded, he moved with the silence of a ghost. He produced a pair of thin latex gloves from his pocket. Who carries latex gloves to a family dinner? And slipped them on. He moved to the desk. He did not touch the computer yet. Instead, he began to sift through the papers on my desk. He wasn't reading them. He was scanning them. Then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He pulled a small, high-intensity UV light from his pocket and swept it over the keypad of my safe. He was looking for wear patterns on the buttons to deduce the combination. I returned to the room exactly 4 minutes later. Daniel was standing by the window, admiring the rain. His gloves vanished. His posture relaxed. "All done," he smiled. "Thank you, Daniel," I said. "You are a godsend." After he left that evening, I went back into the study. I had placed a single strand of my own hair across the seal of the bottom drawer, adhered with a microscopic dot of wax. The hair was broken. He had opened the drawer where I kept the old deactivated hard drives. I also noticed the books on the shelf behind the desk. To the naked eye, they were untouched. But I had aligned the spine of a specific volume on the Civil War exactly flush with the edge of the shelf. It was now pushed back 2 millimeters. He had pulled it out, checked for a hidden mechanism behind it, and replaced it. He was not just a thief. He was a professional. And he was getting impatient. The physical intrusion was only one front of the war. The psychological front was far more insidious. Daniel began a campaign of gaslighting designed to erode my daughter's faith in my competence. I overheard them a few days later in the solarium. Emily was painting, and Daniel was sitting nearby reading a tablet. "I am worried about him, Em," Daniel said, his voice laced with concern. "About who? Dad?" Emily asked, pausing her brush. "He called me yesterday and asked the same question 3 times, Daniel lied. "And today, I saw him wandering near the perimeter fence talking to himself. He seemed confused, disoriented." "He talks to the plants sometimes," Emily said defensively, though I could hear the seed of doubt taking root in her voice. "He has always been eccentric." "There is eccentric, and then there is decline," Daniel said softly. "I have seen this before with my own grandfather. It starts small. Forgetting keys, mood swings, paranoia. I just want to make sure he is safe. Maybe after the wedding we should look into getting a power of attorney, just for his finances, so he does not make a mistake and lose the house." I gripped the handle of the gardening shears I was holding until my knuckles turned white. He was trying to have me declared incompetent. He wanted legal control over my assets. Then came the financial probe. 2 weeks before the wedding, Emily came to me. She looked distressed, chewing on her lower lip, a habit she had since childhood, when she was about to ask for something she thought she didn't deserve. "Dad," she started, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Can we talk?" "Anything for you, sweetheart," I said, putting down my newspaper. "It is about Hope Horizon," she said. "Daniel is so stressed. One of their major donors pulled out at the last minute. Political reasons. It is awful. They have a shipment of medical supplies sitting on a dock in Jakarta, and they cannot pay the customs fees to release it. Children are waiting for those antibiotics." I knew where this was going. I had checked the shipping manifest for Jakarta that morning. There was no shipment from Hope Horizon. "That is terrible," I said. "What does Daniel need?" "He needs a bridge loan," she said, her voice small. "Just for a month, until the new grant money comes in. He did not want to ask you. He was mortified when I suggested it. But I know you have some savings." "How much?" I asked. $200,000, she whispered. I let out a low whistle. "Emily, that is a lot of money. That is most of my retirement fund." "I know, Dad, and I would never ask if it wasn't life or death. Daniel said he would sign a promissory note. He will pay you back with interest." I looked at my daughter. She was being used as a pawn in a con, her empathy weaponized against her own father. I had to walk a razor's edge here. If I gave the money, I was funding the enemy. If I refused too harshly, I proved Daniel's point that I was a miserly, senile old man. "I cannot do it, Emily," I said gently. "My money is tied up in annuities. I cannot access that kind of cash without penalties that would bankrupt me." "I am so sorry." Emily's face fell. "Oh, I understand. I will tell him." Later that evening, Daniel cornered me while Emily was in the shower. The mask slipped just for a second. "Emily tells me you could not help with the Jakarta situation," he said. His voice was devoid of the usual warmth. It was cold, flat, and metallic. "I am on a fixed income, Daniel," I said, pouring myself a tea. "I have to be careful." He stared at me. For a moment I saw the violence behind his eyes. He looked at me not as a person, but as an obstacle that was proving to be annoyingly stubborn. "It is a shame," he said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "It would be tragic if the foundation failed because of a lack of family support. Emily would be devastated." "We all have to live within our means," I replied, holding his gaze. He held the stare for 5 seconds, an eternity in social interaction, before blinking and smiling. The transition was terrifying. "You are right, of course. Wisdom of the elders, we will figure it out." He walked away, but I knew I had just accelerated his timeline. He needed money, and he needed it fast. I went back to my surveillance station that night and dug deeper into Hope Horizon. On the surface, it was impeccable. They had a glossy website, photos of Daniel shaking hands with minor celebrities, and annual reports that looked professional. But when I deployed a packet-sniffing algorithm to trace their donation flows, the picture changed. The money coming in was not from charitable donors. It was being routed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. And the money going out? It wasn't buying antibiotics. It was purchasing high-end encrypted hard drives, frequency jammers, and specialized drilling equipment. That was when the realization hit me like a physical blow. Daniel was not just a grifter looking for a payout. He wasn't just after the house or my savings account. If he only wanted money, he would have moved on to an easier mark when I refused the loan. He was staying. He was enduring the charade of the wedding. He was tolerating my presence. He was looking for something specific. I pulled up the feed from the study again. I rewound the footage to his earlier visit. I watched him scanning the room. He wasn't looking for jewelry. He wasn't looking for cash. He was checking the dimensions of the room. He was tapping the walls when he thought the camera couldn't see him. He was looking for a hidden space. He knew. Somehow he knew about the Omega prototype. The Omega chip was a piece of hardware I had developed 10 years ago. A quantum decryption processor capable of shattering any encryption standard currently in use. It was too dangerous to exist. I had told the world I destroyed it. I had told my partners it was a failure. But I had kept the only functional prototype. It was sealed in a lead-lined box, buried inside a concrete vault, beneath the foundation of this very house. Daniel Thorne wasn't a charity worker. He was a corporate mercenary. And he wasn't here to marry my daughter. He was here to extract a weapon that could destabilize the global economy. My son-in-law was a monster, and he was sleeping down the hall from my little girl. I looked at the calendar. The wedding was in 2 weeks. I did not have much time. I needed to know who sent him, and I needed to know how many others were waiting in the shadows. I reached into my desk and pulled out an old flip phone, a burner I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I had not called in a decade. "It is me," I said when the line clicked open. "The wolves are at the door." The call I made was not to a local private investigator who charges $50 an hour to take photos of cheating spouses. I reached out to a man known simply as Miller. In a past life, Miller was a cryptanalyst for the NSA who decided that the private sector paid better and asked fewer ethical questions. He did not have an office. He existed as a voice on an encrypted frequency and a routing number in a Swiss bank. "I need a deep dive," I had told him. "Level 5. Tear him apart down to the subatomic level." Miller had laughed a dry scratching sound. "Level 5 costs $20,000, John, and it takes 48 hours. "Get it done," I said. "And Miller, if you find nothing, look harder." 48 hours later, a secure file appeared on my isolated server. I opened it with trembling hands, sitting in the blue glow of my monitors, while the rest of the house slept. The first page was a summary, and the first sentence made my blood run cold. Subject: Thorne Daniel. Status: synthetic identity. I leaned back in my chair, removing my glasses to rub my eyes. A synthetic identity is not just a fake ID you buy on a street corner. It is a masterpiece of deception. It involves taking a real social security number, usually from a child who died in infancy, before the digitization of records, and building a credit history, a digital footprint, and a life around it over the course of years. It is a technique used by deep-cover espionage agents and high-level cartel fixers. According to Miller's report, Daniel Thorne did not exist prior to 5 years ago. There were no yearbook photos, no childhood medical records, no old MySpace profiles, and no distant cousins in Ohio. He had simply materialized in New York 5 years ago with a pristine credit score and a degree from a university that had indeed had a student by that name, but the records there showed signs of digital tampering, backdated entries inserted directly into the alumni database. The man sleeping under my roof was a ghost. He was a construct designed for a specific purpose, and right now, that purpose was my daughter. But a ghost rarely works alone. A synthetic identity requires maintenance. It requires a handler. That handler appeared 3 days later. "Dad," Emily said over breakfast, her face glowing. "Daniel's mother is flying in for the engagement party. She is so excited to meet you. She raised him all by herself after his father died." "That is wonderful," I lied, buttering my toast with deliberate slowness. "What is her name?" "Margaret," Emily said. "She is a retired librarian. She sounds so sweet on the phone." When Margaret arrived, she was indeed the picture of a sweet retired librarian. She wore a sensible cardigan, sensible shoes, and had gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She brought a homemade apple pie as a gift. But when I shook her hand, I felt calluses. Not the calluses of a gardener or a cook, but the specific hardened ridges on the palm and index finger that come from years of handling a firearm. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice soft and fluttering. "It is such a joy. Daniel has told me so much about your beautiful home." "Please, call me John," I said, playing the bumbling host. Come in, come in. Let me show you around." As we walked through the house, I watched her. A normal guest looks at the decor. Margaret looked at the ingress and egress points. Her eyes lingered on the thickness of the doors and the placement of the motion sensors. When we passed the basement door, which I kept disguised as a linen closet, her gaze snagged on it for a fraction of a second. She recognized the reinforced hinges that were barely visible beneath the paint. She was not a librarian. She was a field operator, and she was the one pulling Daniel's strings. I knew I needed to get closer. I needed to hear what they said when they thought they were safe. I could not bug the guest room. Daniel sweeps for bugs. I had seen him do it with his phone. I needed something he would carry with him, something he would welcome into his personal space. The engagement party was the perfect opportunity. It was a small affair, just family, and a few of Emily's friends. The champagne was flowing, and the mood was light. I tapped my glass with a spoon, calling for silence. "I would like to make a toast," I said, standing up and looking the part of the proud, slightly tipsy father. "To my daughter Emily, and to Daniel. You know it is hard for a father to give away his little girl. But seeing the man you are, Daniel makes it easier." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a velvet box. I wanted to give you something to welcome you to the family, I said, handing it to him. Daniel opened the box. Inside was a pair of vintage gold cufflinks inlaid with onyx. They were beautiful, understated, and expensive. John, Daniel said, looking genuinely touched. These are magnificent. You shouldn't have. They belong to my grandfather, I lied. Wear them in good health. Daniel immediately took off the ones he was wearing and put on my gift. He held up his wrist to show Emily, beaming. He had no idea that inside the hollowed-out casing of the right cufflink was a passive resonance transmitter. It was not a battery-powered bug that emits a signal you can scan for. It was a piece of Cold War technology I had updated for the modern era. It sat dormant until it was hit with a specific high-frequency radar beam, which I was currently projecting from a hidden emitter in the ceiling of the living room, and another I had installed in the guest house where Margaret was staying. When the beam hit the cufflink, the internal membrane vibrated, modulating the reflected signal with the audio from the room. It was undetectable by standard bug sweepers because it emitted no power of its own. That night, I sat in my bunker headphones pressed to my ears. I waited. For hours, I heard nothing but the rustling of fabric and the distant sounds of the party winding down. Then, around 2 a.m, I heard a door close. The signal grew stronger. Daniel had gone to the guest house to speak with Margaret. "Turn off the lights," Margaret's voice came through sharp and commanding. Gone was the fluttering tone of the retired librarian. This was the voice of a woman who ordered executions. "Relax," Daniel's voice replied. He sounded tired, irritable. "The old man is asleep. He was 3 scotches deep before cake was served." "Never assume," Margaret snapped. "Did you check the perimeter?" "I checked it," Daniel scoffed. "It is a joke. Honeywell sensors from the 90s. I could bypass them with a magnet and a piece of chewing gum. You are worrying too much." "I worry because there are billions of dollars at stake, Alexei," she hissed. My breath hitched. Alexei. His real name was Alexei. "I know the stakes, Daniel," Alexei retorted. "But living with these people is exhausting. The girl is clingy, and the father god, he is pathetic. He gave me these cufflinks today. Probably thinks he is buying my loyalty. Stingy old bastard won't even loan us $200,000 to keep the cover story floating, but he hands out family heirlooms." I heard the sound of glass clinking. They were pouring drinks. "Focus," Margaret said. "We are not here for his money. We are here for the vault." "I am telling you it is under the garage," Daniel said. "I saw the blueprints he left on the table. There is a void space in the foundation." "And the contents?" Margaret asked. "Are we certain?" "I am certain," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He plays the role of the retired freelancer well, but I saw the books in his study. Advanced quantum mechanics, cryptography journals from the dark web. He still has it, Margaret. He has the Omega key." The words hit me like a physical blow. The Omega key. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my extremities cold. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in 10 years. The Omega key was not a physical key. It was a processor architecture. A decade ago, when I was still CEO of Aegis, we had stumbled upon a method of arranging qubits that allowed for the instantaneous factorization of large, prime numbers. In layman's terms, it was a skeleton key for the Internet. It could break RSA encryption elliptic curve cryptography, everything that protects the world's banking systems, nuclear launch codes, and power grids. When I realized what we had created, I was terrified. I saw a future where privacy ceased to exist, where a single bad actor could collapse the global economy in an hour. So I did the only thing I could. I destroyed the data. I wiped the servers. I fired the team and paid them millions in hush money. I told the board the project was a failure, but I was arrogant. I thought that maybe one day humanity would be responsible enough to handle it. So I kept one prototype. Just one. A small, Innocent-looking chip the size of a thumbnail encased in a lead block and buried in a hyper-secure vault beneath my study. Not the garage, as Daniel foolishly believed. I sat there in the dark, the headphones digging into my skull. This was not a simple con. This was not about Emily's inheritance. This was a state-level extraction operation. If we get that chip, Daniel continued, his voice thick with greed, the buyer in Dubai is offering $2 billion. $2 billion, Margaret. We can disappear. We can buy our own island. First, we have to get it, Margaret said coldly. And the wedding is the perfect cover. The house will be full of vendors. Chaos. Noise. We will extract it during the ceremony while everyone is watching the bride. And the old man? Daniel asked. What if he gets in the way? There was a silence on the tape. A long, heavy silence. Then he has a heart attack, Margaret said casually. He is almost 50. High blood pressure. It happens all the time. We have the potassium chloride solution ready. It looks like natural causes on an autopsy. I ripped the headphones off my head, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I stared at the wall of monitors, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were going to kill me. They were going to murder me in my own home, steal a weapon of mass destruction, and leave my daughter an orphan on her wedding day. I looked at the screen where the waveform of their voices was still scrolling. Rage, cold and sharp, began to replace the fear. They thought I was a sheep. They thought I was a stumbling block to be removed. They had forgotten one thing. I did not just build the Omega Key. I built the security systems that protected the most dangerous secrets on Earth. I was not a software engineer. I was the architect of the invisible walls that held civilization together. I stood up and walked to the wall safe. I spun the dial and opened the heavy steel door. Inside, next to a stack of emergency cash and passports, lay a matte black pistol. It was a Sig Sauer P226. I hadn't fired it in years, but I checked the magazine. It was full. I placed the gun on my desk. I would not use it yet. A gun was a crude tool, and I needed to be surgical. If I went to the police now, Daniel would vanish. He had diplomatic cover through his fake charity. He would claim I was a senile, paranoid old man, and he would be on a plane before the warrant was signed. And even if they arrested him, the organization behind him, the people who built his identity, would come back. They would come for Emily. No, I had to end this permanently. I had to trap them in a way that left no room for escape. I looked at the date on my computer screen. The wedding was in 10 days. You want the Omega Key? I whispered to the empty room. I will give it to you, but you are going to wish you had never asked. I sat back down and began to type. I needed to upgrade the house. The retro security system, Daniel mocked, was about to become a lethal weapon. I would turn this Victorian mansion into a labyrinth. I would turn the garden into a cage. The game had changed. I was no longer protecting a secret. I was hunting wolves. The audio feed from the cufflink was clear, crystal clear, transmitting the kind of darkness that stains the soul just by listening to it. I sat in the blue light of my basement command center, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the desk, as the voices of the two people sleeping under my roof drifted through the speakers. What I heard that night stripped away the last remnants of my civilized self. It was not just a heist. It was an extermination plan. Stop pacing, Alexei. The woman's voice cut through the static. It was Margaret. But gone was the maternal warmth she performed for Emily. Her tone was sharp, intimate, and distinctly possessive. You are making me nervous. I cannot find it, Magda. Daniel, Alexei hissed back. The sound of a zipper moving suggested they were undressing. I have scanned the walls. I have checked the floorboards in the library. The old man has it buried deep. We stick to the primary objective, Margaret, Magda replied. Then there was a pause, followed by a sound that made my stomach turn. A kiss. Not a motherly peck on the cheek, but a long, wet lover's kiss. We get married. We secure the residency rights. Then we initiate the medical event. The potassium chloride? Yes, a concentrated dose during his evening tea. It mimics a massive coronary. By the time the paramedics arrive, the compound will have broken down. He is 48. He lives a sedentary life. No one will question a heart attack. The grieving daughter will be too distraught to demand an autopsy, especially if her loving husband advises against cutting up her poor father. I stared at the waveform on the screen, my hands clenched so tight that my fingernails cut into my palms. They were discussing my murder with the casual indifference of a couple deciding what to order for dinner. They were not just thieves, they were butchers. But what came next was worse. It was the moment that turned my fear into a cold, hard block of ice in my chest. "And if we kill him and still cannot find the Omega chip?" Daniel asked. "What then? We cannot exactly ask a corpse for the combination." "Then we move to Plan B," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a terrifying purr. "The girl, Emily." "She knows nothing," Daniel scoffed. "She is an idiot. She thinks the cloud is where rain comes from." "She is leverage," Margaret corrected. "If the old man is stubborn, or if he has a dead man switch, we do not kill him immediately. We take him on the wedding night. We tie him to a chair in the basement. And then we bring in the girl. You are the husband, Alexei. You have rights. We make him watch. We make him watch what happens to his precious little artist until he gives up the code." A roar of white noise exploded in my head. I ripped the headphones off and threw them across the room, knocking over a stack of hard drives. I stood up, gasping for air, the room spinning. The image of my Emily, my sweet, innocent Emily, being used as a tool of torture by the man she loved. It was enough to make me want to grab the Sig Sauer and march upstairs right then and there. I wanted to put a bullet between Daniel's eyes while he slept. I wanted to burn the guest house down with Margaret inside it. But I stopped. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. I was a soldier of the digital age, but I knew the rules of the physical world. If I went upstairs now, I would be the aggressor. Daniel had diplomatic immunity through his sham NGO status, something Miller had confirmed in his report. If I shot him, I would go to prison for life, and Emily would be left alone, traumatized and vulnerable to whatever associates they had waiting in the wings. Even if I called the police, what did I have? An illegal wiretap? A conversation about a plan that had not happened yet? A good lawyer would tear that evidence apart in 10 minutes. They would claim it was a role-playing game, a screenplay, they were writing anything. And while the courts debated, they would vanish. Or worse, they would accelerate their timeline. I could not rely on the law. The law was too slow, too blunt, and too fair. These people did not deserve fairness. They deserved a reckoning. I sat back down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of pure distilled hatred. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 7 days. 7 days until the wedding. 7 days until they planned to turn my home into a slaughterhouse. "Okay," I whispered to the silence. "You want to play the long game? Let us play." I decided then and there to give them exactly what they wanted. They wanted a weak, dying old man? I would give them a corpse walking. They wanted a fortress to plunder? I would build them a tomb. The next morning the performance began. I woke up early and skipped my usual shave. I applied a subtle layer of gray makeup under my eyes to simulate exhaustion. When I walked into the kitchen, I let my left foot drag just a fraction of an inch, scuffing the floor tile. Emily was already there brewing coffee. Daniel was sitting at the table reading the news on his tablet. "Morning, Dad," Emily chirped, then her smile faltered. "Dad? Are you okay? You look pale." I reached for a mug and deliberately let my hand tremor. The ceramic clattered against the granite countertop, loud and jarring. "I am fine," I muttered, gripping the counter for support. "Just a little dizzy. A head rush. It happens." Daniel looked up. His eyes didn't show concern. They showed clinical interest. He was assessing the symptoms. "Here, John, sit down," he said, pulling out a chair. "You have been working too hard in the garden. You need to rest." "Maybe you are right," I sighed, sinking into the chair. I rubbed my left arm, feigning a dull ache. "I have been feeling heavy lately. My chest feels tight." I saw a glance pass between Daniel and Emily. Emily looked terrified. Daniel looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "Dad, you need to see a doctor," Emily insisted, grabbing my hand. "No doctors," I snapped, channeling the stubborn old man persona. "They just poke and prod. I am fine." "But," I paused, looking down at the table. "It does make one think about the future." I looked up at Daniel. "I was thinking, Daniel, since you are going to be family, maybe it is time I updated my will. Just in case. I want to make sure the house, the accounts, everything is transferred to Emily without probate. And since she is not well, she is not great with numbers perhaps, I should name you as the executor." It was the bait, the ultimate bait. I was offering them the keys to the kingdom on a silver platter. Daniel's face was a masterpiece of controlled avarice. "John, please let us not talk about such morbid things. You have plenty of years left." "I insist," I said. "I will call my lawyer on Monday. We can get the papers drawn up before the wedding. I want to sign them the morning of the ceremony. A gift to you both." "If it gives you peace of mind," Daniel said, bowing his head solemnly. "I would be honored to protect Emily's legacy." "Good," I wheezed. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to lie down." As I shuffled out of the room, I heard Daniel whisper to Emily, "See, he knows he is declining. It is for the best, Em. We will take care of him." They took the bait hook, line, and sinker. By that afternoon, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Daniel and Margaret stopped prowling as much. They became solicitous, almost giddy. They stopped looking for the chip with such desperation because they believed I was about to hand them legal ownership of the entire property. Why break into a safe when the owner is about to give you the combination? This gave me the freedom I needed. While they were busy planning the wedding menu and counting their future billions, I went to work. My house was already smart, but I needed it to be lethal. I waited until 3 in the morning when the house was silent to begin my upgrades. I moved through the walls like a phantom, using the service tunnels and crawl spaces that only I knew existed. My first target was the basement. Daniel believed the vault was under the garage, but I needed to ensure that if he found the real entrance to the panic room, hidden behind the wine rack, he would regret it. I installed a localized oxygen depletion system in the corridor leading to the panic room. It was a fire suppression system theoretically designed to suck the air out of a room to starve a flame. But it worked just as well on human lungs. If unauthorized biometrics were detected, the hallway would become a vacuum in 10 seconds. Next, I went to the perimeter. The old sensors Daniel had mocked were indeed outdated. I replaced the magnetic contacts on the windows with pressure-sensitive piezoelectric strips. They didn't just detect if a window was opened. They detected the vibration of a glass cutter. But my masterpiece was the wedding gift I prepared for the ceremony itself. I spent 3 nights in the sub-basement workshop, soldering and coding. I took the concept of a taser and scaled it up. I modified the decorative metal lattice that ran along the edge of the altar platform, the very spot where Daniel would stand to say his vows. I wired it to a high-amperage capacitor bank hidden in the floor joists. It was not enough voltage to kill, but it was enough amperage to lock every muscle in the human body into a rigid, agonizing spasm. I connected the trigger to a remote frequency, the same frequency I programmed into the button of my car key fob, which I would carry in my pocket. Then there was the garage. Daniel was convinced the void space was there. I decided to make his delusion a reality. I used a holographic projector, technology I had acquired from a failed military contract years ago, and set it up in the dark corner of the garage. When activated, it would project the image of a keypad and a heavy steel door onto the blank concrete wall. It looked solid. It looked real. Behind the projection, I rigged a simple but effective trap. A net launcher loaded with a conductive mesh, connected to the house's main power grid. If anyone tried to touch the fake door, they would break the light beam the net would fire, and they would be wrapped in electrified wire. By the 5th day, I was exhausted. My hands were covered in tiny cuts from stripping wires and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. But the house was no longer a home. It was a weapon. Every room had a trap. Every hallway had a camera. The wedding preparations were in full swing. Florists were bringing in thousands of white roses. Caterers were setting up tables in the garden. It was a grotesque juxtaposition. They were decorating a slaughterhouse with lace and silk. I watched Emily through it all. She was so happy, so radiantly beautiful. She tried on her dress for me in the living room, spinning around so the silk caught the light. "Do I look okay, Dad?" she asked. "You look like an angel," I said, my voice cracking. "Your mother would be so proud." "I wish she was here," Emily whispered. "She would know if I am doing the right thing. Sometimes Daniel gets so intense. But then he is sweet again. I guess that is just marriage, right?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and tell her that she was sleeping next to a viper. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I told her now, her reaction would give it away. She was a terrible liar. Daniel would see the fear in her eyes, and he would strike. I had to let her walk into the fire, trusting that I could pull her out before she burned. "Trust your heart, Emily," I said, hating myself for the platitude. "And trust your old dad. I will always be right behind you." "I know, Dad," she smiled. 2 days before the wedding, Daniel cornered me in the library. He held a glass of whiskey in his hand, his demeanor arrogant and relaxed. "Everything is set for the big day, John," he said. "Margaret has arranged for a special toast, a vintage wine from her personal collection. The poison. They were going to do it during the toast." "That sounds delightful," I wheezed, coughing into a handkerchief. "I hope I can hold it down. My stomach has been in knots." "Oh, I am sure you will handle it," Daniel smiled, clinking his glass against the bottle on the table. "It will be a night to end all nights." "Indeed," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I have a feeling none of us will ever forget it." He walked away, whistling a tune. He thought he was the apex predator. He thought I was the wounded gazelle. He didn't know that the gazelle had just wired the entire savannah with C4. That night, I did one last sweep of the system. Protocol Red Wedding was online. The cameras were recording to an off-site cloud server that I had set to auto-forward to the FBI Cybercrimes Division upon my command. I had the evidence of the conspiracy. The audio recordings, the financial traces, the synthetic identity report, all queued up on a delayed send. But I needed one more thing. I needed to separate Emily from them at the critical moment. I needed her to be the one to deliver the final blow, not with a gun, but with the truth. I sat down and wrote a note. A small, simple note on a piece of paper. I folded it 4 times and slipped it into the pocket of my tuxedo jacket. The trap was set. The players were in position. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of Daniel Thorne's life. And as the rain began to fall outside, washing the world in gray, I closed my eyes and prayed that my daughter would forgive me for the violence I was about to unleash. The psychological warfare had reached its zenith. I knew that to catch a predator of Daniel's caliber, I could not simply wait for him to step into a physical snare. I had to guide him there, holding his hand, making him believe it was his own idea to walk into the pit. The mind of a con artist is arrogant. It relies on the certainty that everyone else in the room is slower, dumber, and more trusting than they are. I intended to weaponize that arrogance. I set the stage in the library on Wednesday afternoon. I knew Daniel's schedule. He always took a fake conference call with his donors at 3 in the afternoon. I waited until 5 minutes past 3. Then I spread a series of large yellowed architectural blueprints across the oak desk. These were not the actual blueprints of the house. I had printed them that morning in the sub-basement using aged paper stock and a plotter I had calibrated to mimic the ink bleed of 1990s drafting technology. The blueprints depicted a sprawling underground complex. But unlike reality, where my command center sat beneath the study, these drawings showed a reinforced panic room and server vault located directly beneath the concrete slab of the detached garage. I had labeled the entry point clearly: access hatch, northwest corner, hydraulic lift. I left the door slightly ajar and began to mutter to myself, shuffling the papers with the frustration of a confused old man. "Where is it? Where is that blasted ventilation schematic?" I said aloud, knowing the acoustics of the hallway would carry my voice. Precisely on cue, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He was wearing his usual mask of polite concern, but his eyes immediately locked onto the papers. "Everything all right, John?" he asked, stepping into the room without an invitation. "Oh, Daniel," I said, jumping slightly as if startled. I made a clumsy attempt to cover the main map with a newspaper. "I did not hear you coming. Just looking over some old maintenance records. The drainage in the garage has been acting up." Daniel walked over his gaze, burning a hole through the newspaper. "The garage? That is a separate foundation, isn't it? You have to be careful with those old structures. Do you want me to take a look?" No, I insisted, waving my hand dismissively. "It is fine. Just complicated. This house has secrets. Old fallout shelters from the Cold War. Useless now, mostly filled with damp boxes." I saw his nostrils flare slightly. I had just confirmed his theory. "Well, do not stress yourself out," he said smoothly. "Why don't I make you some tea? You look flushed." "That would be lovely," I said, sinking into my chair and feigning exhaustion. "I will just rest my eyes for a moment." I closed my eyes and let my breathing deepen into a rhythmic snore. I kept my body entirely limp, a skill I had learned during resistance training 30 years ago. Through the slit of my eyelids, I watched. Daniel moved. He did not go to the kitchen. He moved silently to the desk. He carefully lifted the corner of the newspaper. I saw him pull a tiny high-resolution camera from his sleeve. Not his phone, but specialized spy gear. He snapped 3 rapid photographs of the garage schematic, specifically focusing on the coordinates of the false entrance. He then smoothed the newspaper back down, exactly as it had been, and tiptoed out of the room. He had the map. He believed he had the location of the Omega key. The trap in the garage, the electrified net, and the holographic door was now prime real estate. But I needed to secure the post-game landscape as well. I needed to ensure that even if his physical heist failed, he would not bail out before the ceremony. I needed him to believe that staying through the "I do" was the most profitable option available. That evening, I invited Emily and Daniel into the living room. I had a bottle of champagne on ice. "I have a surprise," I announced, pouring 3 glasses. "I know I have been a bit absent lately. My health has been weighing on me. But I have been thinking about your future." I pulled a thick legal document from my briefcase. "Emily, you know I have always worried about you," I said, looking at my daughter. "The art world is volatile. I want to make sure you never have to worry about money, no matter what happens to me." "Dad, stop talking like that," Emily said, her voice wavering. "Hush, listen," I smiled weakly. "I am setting up an irrevocable trust. It transfers the entire estate, the house, the investment accounts, the patent royalties, into a fund for you. It activates the moment you are married." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. I saw Daniel's Adam's apple bob. He was doing the math in his head. The estate was worth millions. However, I continued, turning to Daniel with an apologetic look. "My lawyers are sharks. They insisted on a condition: to protect the assets from unforeseen liabilities. They drafted a prenuptial agreement." The air in the room froze. A prenup is usually a deal-breaker for a con artist. It cuts off their access to the funds in the event of a divorce. It basically states that in the event of a separation, the trust remains solely in Emily's name, I explained. But, and this is the important part, the trust grants the spouse full executive power over the assets if Emily is incapacitated, or if she chooses to grant power of attorney. I watched Daniel process this. He didn't care about divorce. He never planned to divorce Emily. He planned to be a grieving widower. If Emily tragically died, shortly after I tragically died, or if he gaslit her into signing over power of attorney, as he had tried to do with me, the clause gave him everything. He thought I was handing him a lock. In reality, I was handing him the key to the city, unaware that the city was mine. "John," Daniel said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I do not care about the money. I am marrying Emily for Emily. If signing a piece of paper makes you feel secure, I will sign it right now. I would sign it in blood if I had to." "Oh, Daniel," Emily sniffed, tears welling in her eyes. "You are amazing." "I just want us to be a family," Daniel said, squeezing her hand. He signed the papers without even reading the fine print. If he had, he might have noticed the clause on page 42 that voided the entire agreement if either party was found to have committed a felony. But he was too blinded by the prospect of absolute control. With the domestic front secured, I turned to the final piece of the puzzle, the law. I could not rely on local police. They would send a patrol car, take a report, and scare Daniel off. I needed the heavy artillery. I needed the FBI. I initiated a secure, encrypted handshake with the Cybercrimes Division. I did not use the standard tip line. I used a backdoor frequency I had helped build for them a decade ago. It was a digital flare that I knew would light up the screens at Quantico. 2 hours later, my screen blinked. Connection established. "This is Special Agent Vance," a voice came through the speakers. "Identify yourself. You are on a restricted federal channel." "This is John Williams," I replied, my voice steady. "Former CEO of Aegis Dynamics. Clearance Level 1. I am sending you a data packet. Codename, Wolf in the Fold." I hit send. The packet contained everything. The Miller report on Daniel's synthetic identity. The audio recordings of Daniel and Margaret discussing the murder plot. The financial tracing of the Hope Horizon money laundering scheme. And most importantly, the technical specifications of the Omega chip they were hunting. There was a long silence on the other end. "Mr. Williams," Agent Vance's voice returned the hostility, replaced by urgent professionalism. "We have reviewed the preliminary data. We have had Alexei Volkov, your Daniel Thorne, on a watch list for 3 years. We lost him in Budapest. We didn't know he had resurfaced." "He is in my house," I said. "He plans to steal a Class A quantum weapon and murder me and my daughter within 48 hours. "We are mobilizing a tactical team," Vance said immediately. "We can have agents at your door in 20 minutes. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." "No," I cut him off. "If you come now, you get him for fraud and identity theft. Maybe conspiracy. He will lawyer up, he will trade intel, and he will be out in 10 years. I want him gone forever. I want him for attempted murder, espionage, and domestic terrorism." "John, that is too risky," Vance argued. "We cannot use civilians as bait." "I am not a civilian," I snapped. "I built the cage you people use to catch these animals. Listen to me. He needs to make the move. He needs to try to take the chip. He needs to attempt the kill. You need to catch him with his hand in the jar. The director won't authorize it. Then tell the director that if he does not authorize it, the Omega source code goes public on the dark web tomorrow morning." I bluffed. "I will burn the world down before I let this man walk away." A pause. A long, heavy sigh. "Okay," Vance said. "We will play it your way. But we are embedding agents, catering staff, musicians. We will be inside the perimeter. The moment he initiates violence, we take him down." "Wait for my signal," I said. "The signal is the disruption of the ceremony." "Copy that. Stay safe, Williams." The line went dead. The I sat back, the adrenaline crashing. I had the trap. I had the backup. But I still had to survive the next 48 hours in a house with two killers who were counting the minutes until my death. The waiting was the hardest part. The silence in the house felt heavy, charged with static electricity. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. 2 days before the wedding, the tension finally cracked. I was walking past Emily's room when I heard sobbing. It was a muffled, desperate sound that broke my heart. I pushed the door open gently. Emily was sitting on the edge of her bed, her face buried in her hands. Her wedding dress was hanging on the closet door, a ghostly silhouette in the dim light. "Em," I whispered. "What is it?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad," she choked out. I sat beside her and pulled her into a hug. She was trembling like a leaf in a storm. "It is just nerves," I soothed, stroking her hair. "Cold feet. It is normal." "No." She shook her head violently, pulling away to look at me. "It is not cold feet. It is Daniel." My stomach dropped. "Did he hurt you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "He yelled at me," she whispered. "I went into the guest room to look for a charger. He was on his laptop. He slammed it shut the second I walked in. He looked furious. Dad, I have never seen him look like that. His eyes were so black." She took a shuddering breath. "And he had a phone, a burner phone. I saw it on the nightstand. When I asked him about it, he grabbed my arm. He said I was snooping. He said I should learn to respect his privacy if I wanted to be a good wife." She showed me her arm. There were faint red marks where his fingers had dug into her skin. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to march down the hall and throw him through a window. But I couldn't. Not yet. "He apologized later," Emily said, wiping her nose. "He said he is just stressed about the charity funding. He said he loves me. But Dad, I am scared. I feel like I do not know him." She looked at me, begging for me to validate her fear. She wanted me to tell her to call it off. She wanted her father to save her. And I had to lie to her. If I told her the truth now, that he was a spy, a killer, a fraud, she would panic. She would scream. She would confront him. And if she confronted him before the FB, I was in position before the trap was sprung. Margaret would put a bullet in her head to silence her. They would kill us both and flee. I had to keep her in the play. I had to force her to walk down that aisle. "Sweetheart," I said, forcing a gentle smile that felt like acid on my lips. "Listen to me. Weddings are stressful. Men handle stress poorly. He is under a lot of pressure with work. He loves you. I have seen the way he looks at you. But the phone—" "Probably work," I lied. "Confidential donor calls. He has to be discreet." "You think I am overreacting?" she asked, her voice small. "I think you are tired," I said, kissing her forehead. "You are going to be a beautiful bride. Do not let one bad moment ruin the rest of your life." The words tasted like ash. I was gaslighting my own daughter to keep her alive. "Okay," she whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Okay, I trust you, Dad." "I know," I said, holding her tight as I stared at the door. "I know." She fell asleep, eventually exhausted by the tears. I stayed there for a long time, watching her breathe. "I am sorry, Emily," I whispered into the dark. "I am so sorry. But you have to be brave for 2 more days. And when this is over, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I left her room and walked down the hallway. I passed Daniel's room. The door was closed. I could hear the faint murmur of voices inside. He was probably planning his victory speech. I touched the pocket of my jacket, feeling the weight of the car key fob that controlled the electric altar. "Laugh while you can, Alexei," I thought. "Your wedding day is going to be electrifying." I went back to the basement. I had one final preparation to make. I opened the safe and took out the potassium chloride antidote I had synthesized. I loaded a syringe and taped it to the inside of my calf beneath my trouser leg. If they managed to poison me before the ceremony, I would have one shot at survival. The game board was set, the pieces were moving, and the king was ready to sacrifice himself to save the queen. The sun would rise on the wedding day in 40 hours. It would be a beautiful day for a funeral. I just had to make sure it was his, not mine. The air in the house that evening was thick enough to choke on. It was the night of the rehearsal dinner, an event that is supposed to be filled with nervous excitement and familial bonding. Instead, my home felt like a theater stage, where the actors were forgetting their lines and the audience was waiting for the curtain to catch fire. We held the dinner in the main dining room. The long mahogany table was set with my late wife's silver, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the distorted faces of the monsters sitting among us. I sat at the head of the table, slumped in my chair, playing the role of the fading patriarch. I kept my hand trembling slightly whenever I reached for my water glass, a performance that required more focus than I cared to admit. Daniel sat to my right, looking every inch the golden boy. He wore a navy blazer that likely cost more than my first car, and his hair was coiffed to perfection. He was laughing at a joke one of the bridesmaids had made, throwing his head back in a display of charm that felt engineered in a lab. But I was watching his hands. They were restless. He kept tapping his fork against the tablecloth, a staccato rhythm that betrayed his impatience. He was ready for the end game. Margaret sat across from him. To the untrained eye, she was the doting mother beaming with pride at her son's impending nuptials. But I saw the way her eyes moved. She was not looking at the guests. She was scanning the room, counting the exits, checking the window latches, and assessing the sight lines. Every time a catering staff member walked in, one of whom was actually an undercover federal agent posing as a server, Margaret's gaze would sharpen, dissecting them, looking for a wire or a hidden earpiece. She was a professional, and she was on high alert. "I would like to propose a toast," Daniel said, standing up and clinking his glass. The room fell silent. He turned to me, his smile wide and predatory. "To John," he said, his voice dripping with syrup, "a man who has welcomed me into his home and his heart. I never knew my own father, but in you, John, I feel I have found the guidance and wisdom I always lacked. I promise to take care of Emily and this beautiful estate with the same love you have shown for 20 years. The guests applauded politely. Emily beamed at him, wiping a tear from her eye. I felt bile rise in my throat. The audacity of the man was breathtaking. He was toasting to my death while looking me in the eye. "To family," I wheezed, raising my glass with a shaky hand. "And to the future, whatever it may bring." Daniel drank his eyes, locking with mine over the rim of the glass. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the cold, dead calculation of a shark scenting blood. As the dinner progressed, I felt a familiar vibration against my wrist. It was my smartwatch, configured to receive silent alerts from the Aegis mainframe I had reactivated in the basement. The pattern of the vibration was specific. 3 short pulses, 1 long. Perimeter breach. Electronic intrusion detected. I kept my face impassive, but my mind began to race. They were making their move on the digital front. Daniel's associates on the outside, likely a van parked a few blocks away, or a remote team in Eastern Europe, were attacking my firewall. They were trying to loop the camera feeds and disable the silent alarms so that Daniel and Margaret could move freely later that night. I reached under the table and pressed a sequence of buttons on my phone, which was resting on my knee. I did not block the attack. If I blocked it, they would know the system was more sophisticated than I had let on. They would get spooked. Instead, I opened the gate. I diverted their traffic into a honeypot, a mirrored server that looked exactly like my main system, but was completely isolated from the actual controls. I allowed them to upload their looping software. On their screens, they would see a system-disabled confirmation. They would think the cameras were frozen on a loop of an empty hallway. In reality, the cameras were still live recording in 4K resolution, and their IP addresses were being logged for the FBI. I looked up at Margaret. A moment later, she checked her phone beneath the table. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She had received the signal. The shields were down. Or so she thought. The dinner wound down around 10 in the evening. The guests began to filter out, leaving only the family in the sprawling, silent house. "I am exhausted," I announced, leaning heavily on the table as I stood up. "I think I will turn in. Big day tomorrow." "Sleep well, John," Daniel said. "Do not worry about locking up. I will handle it." "You are a good lad," I lied. I shuffled up the stairs, my footsteps heavy and slow. But the moment I closed my bedroom door, the act dropped. I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I locked the door, engaged the secondary deadbolt, and moved to the hidden panel behind my wardrobe. I slid it open to reveal a bank of high-definition monitors. I put on my headset. I was now a spectator in my own home, watching the rats scurrying in the maze I had built. Downstairs, the atmosphere changed instantly. The warmth vanished. Daniel loosened his tie and poured himself a large glass of whiskey. Margaret was pacing the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood like gunshots. I switched the audio feed to the living room. "The cameras are looped," Margaret said, her voice low and hard. "We have a 6-hour window before the system resets." "Good," Daniel muttered, downing half the glass in one gulp. "I am sick of this place. I am sick of that old man's wheezing. Did you see him tonight? He is practically a vegetable. Maybe we won't even need the potassium. He might just drop dead from the excitement." "Focus, Alexei," Margaret snapped. "Did you secure the transport?" "The boat is waiting at the marina," Daniel replied. "Once we have the chip and the old man is dealt with, we drive the girl to the reception. We stay for an hour. Then we slip out. We will be in international waters by sunrise." On the screen, I saw Emily enter the room. She had been in the kitchen, likely getting water. She stopped in the doorway, unnoticed by the two conspirators. Daniel had his back to her. He was refilling his glass. "God, I cannot wait to be done with her," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "She is so needy." "Oh, Daniel, look at the moon. Isn't it romantic?" "It is pathetic. She is a stupid cow who thinks she landed a prince." I saw Emily stiffen. Her hand flew to her mouth. The color drained from her face. Margaret saw her then. The woman's eyes went wide, but she didn't panic. She just stared at Emily with a cold, reptilian gaze. Daniel turned around, seeing Margaret's expression. He followed her line of sight and saw Emily standing there. For a split second, there was panic on his face. Then, the charm switch flipped. "Emily!" he exclaimed, stepping forward, his arms open. "Darling, I didn't hear you. We were just arguing about the catering. I was venting. I didn't mean it." But Emily stepped back. The spell was broken. She had heard the venom in his voice, the raw contempt that no amount of acting could cover up. "You called me a cow," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You said you were sick of me." "It was just talk, baby," Daniel said, moving closer, his voice dropping to that hypnotic, soothing register he used so well. "I am drunk. I am stressed. You know how I get. Come here." He reached for her. Emily flinched, but she let him pull her into a hug. I watched her face over his shoulder. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing. She wasn't buying it. Not anymore. The doubt that had been planted over the last few days had just bloomed into full-blown fear. "Go to bed, Emily," Margaret said. Her voice wasn't kind. It was a command. "Daniel needs to rest. You look tired. You—" Emily pulled away, nodding jerkily. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She turned and practically ran out of the room. I switched the camera feed to the upstairs hallway. Emily didn't go to her room. She stopped outside Daniel's bedroom door. She stood there for a long minute, her chest heaving. Then she pushed the door open and slipped inside. "Smart girl," I whispered to the screen. "Find the proof." I switched to the camera inside Daniel's room. It was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the rain. Emily moved to the closet. She was looking for answers. She began to rifle through his suit jacket, the one he had worn to the dinner now draped over a chair. She pulled out his wallet. Nothing. She checked the inside pocket. Her hand came out holding a folded envelope and a small glass vial. She moved to the window to see better. She opened the envelope. I zoomed in with the camera. It was a boarding pass. Cayman Airways. One way. Departure. Tomorrow 11 p.m. The wedding reception was scheduled to end at midnight. He was planning to leave before the last dance. Without her. Then she looked at the vial. It was small, unbranded, filled with a clear liquid. It was the potassium chloride. She didn't know what it was, but she knew that a groom does not carry a vial of strange liquid in his tuxedo pocket unless he plans to use it. I saw the realization hit her. She slumped against the window frame, sliding down to the floor. She put a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. The man she loved was a lie. Her father was right. Her world was crumbling. Suddenly, she stood up. Her face was set in a mask of desperate determination. She shoved the ticket and the vial into her pajama pocket. She was coming to me. She was going to warn me. I watched her open the door to Daniel's room and step into the hallway. But she stopped, dead in her tracks. Standing at the end of the hall, directly in front of my bedroom door, was Margaret. The older woman was not moving. She was standing in the shadows, arms crossed, looking like a gargoyle carved from stone. She wasn't holding a weapon that was visible, but her posture screamed violence. Emily froze. "Where are you going, Emily?" Margaret asked. Her voice was low, carrying down the hall, like a draft of freezing air. "I had a nightmare," Emily stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "I wanted to see my dad." Margaret took one slow step forward. "Your father is asleep. He needs his rest for tomorrow. You wouldn't want to wake him, would you?" It wasn't a question. It was a threat. "Go back to your room or I will hurt him." Emily looked at my door, then back at Margaret. She realized then, as I watched helplessly from behind the screen, that this was not a house anymore. It was a prison, and Margaret was the warden. "No," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, I wouldn't want to wake him." "Good girl," Margaret said. "Go to sleep, Emily. Tomorrow is a big day. You need to look your best." Emily backed away slowly, never taking her eyes off Margaret. She retreated into her own room and locked the door. I heard the click of the lock echo through the audio feed. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. My daughter was safe for the moment, but she was terrified and alone. She knew the truth, or at least enough of it to be scared for her life. I picked up my phone. I sent a single encrypted text to Agent Vance. "Target is active. Hostages confirmed. Initiate containment. Wait for the altar." I looked at the screen one last time. Daniel had passed out on the sofa downstairs. Margaret was pulling a chair into the hallway to sit guard outside my door. They thought they had us trapped. They thought they controlled every exit and every variable. They did not know that I was awake. They did not know that the floorboards they were standing on were wired to blow. "Hold on, Emily," I whispered. "Just one more day. Daddy is coming." The sun did not rise on the morning of the wedding, so much as the darkness simply diluted into a flat slate gray wash. It was typical Seattle weather, a low ceiling of clouds that pressed down on the rooftops like a physical weight. I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room, fastening the buttons of my tuxedo. It was an old suit, one I had bought 20 years ago. It smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, a scent that fit the character I was playing, the obsolete relic, the fading patriarch. But beneath the woolen fabric I was wired for war. I wrapped a thick leather belt around my waist, pulling it tight enough to leave a mark. Tucked into the small of my back, nestled against the spine, was a compact Walther PPK. It was smaller than the Sig Sauer I kept in the safe, easier to conceal beneath the cut of a formal jacket. It was loaded with hollow-point rounds designed to stop a threat without over-penetrating and hitting an innocent bystander in a crowded room. Next came the boutonniere. It was a white rose, delicate and innocent. I pinned it to my lapel with a hand that did not shake. Hidden within the stem of the flower was a microscopic microphone feeding directly to the FBI command van, parked 3 streets away. Finally, the trigger. I slipped a small, flat device into the cuff of my right sleeve, securing it with a piece of surgical tape against my wrist. It was a pressure switch. A single, distinct squeeze of my wrist against my hip would send the signal to the capacitor bank beneath the altar. I looked at my reflection. The gray makeup under my eyes, the slight stoop in my shoulders. It was a perfect disguise. I looked like a man who was ready to die. "Showtime, John," I whispered to the glass. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was already buzzing with activity. A team of florists was carrying massive arrangements of hydrangeas and lilies up the stairs. I pressed my back against the wall to let them pass, feigning the disorientation of an old man overwhelmed by chaos. One of the florists, a burly man with a thick beard, caught my eye. He gave a microscopic nod. I didn't know his name, but I knew his badge number. He was one of Agent Vance's men. The house was infiltrated. The cavalry was already inside the walls. I made my way to the kitchen. Daniel was there, standing by the island, drinking an espresso. He looked sickeningly handsome. His tuxedo was midnight blue, tailored to within a millimeter of his life. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, the picture of the successful, benevolent groom. "John," he exclaimed, setting his cup down. "Good morning. How are we feeling today?" His voice was bright, but his eyes were dead. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience, like one might look at a sick dog that needs to be put down. "A bit breathless," I stammered, clutching my chest for a brief second. "Nervous, I suppose. It is a big day." "It certainly is," Daniel smiled. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He reached out and straightened my bow tie. His fingers felt cold against my neck. "You just need to get through the ceremony, John. Just walk her down the aisle, say your part, and then you can rest. You can rest for a very long time." The double meaning hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "I will try my best," I said, looking down at the floor. "Good man," he patted my cheek. It was a demeaning, patronizing gesture. "I will see you out there." He walked away, whistling. He was so confident. He had the poison ready for the toast. He had the escape boat waiting. He thought he was playing chess with a pigeon. By 11 in the morning, the guests had arrived. 200 people filled the garden behind the house, sitting on white folding chairs arranged in neat rows. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi near the gazebo. It was a scene of perfect manufactured joy. I recognized some of the faces. Old business associates I hadn't seen in years, Emily's college friends, and a dozen or so dignitaries from Daniel's fake charity world. But I also saw the others. The waiter, pouring champagne with tactical precision. The photographer who was checking his angles a little too professionally. The security guard at the gate who was actually an FBI sniper spotter. I took a deep breath and headed upstairs to the bridal suite. It was time to get Emily. The hallway leading to her room felt miles long. I could hear the muffled sound of voices from inside. I knocked gently. "Come in," a voice said. It wasn't Emily, it was Margaret. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of hairspray and expensive perfume. Emily was sitting at the vanity table, staring into the mirror. She was wearing her mother's wedding dress, the white lace cascading around her like a waterfall. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, but her face was the color of ash. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with terror. Margaret was standing behind her, hands resting on Emily's shoulders. To an outsider, it looked like a comforting maternal gesture. To me, it looked like a vice grip. Margaret's fingers were digging into Emily's collarbone. "Look who it is," Margaret cooed, her eyes locking onto mine with the intensity of a laser sight. "The proud father. Doesn't she look like a princess, John?" "She looks beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion, that I didn't have to fake. I walked toward them. Margaret did not move. She kept her body positioned between Emily and the door, blocking any path of escape. "We were just having a little talk about nerves," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a low, steel-hard register. Emily was feeling a bit overwhelmed, but I told her that she needs to pull it together. For you, John. She wouldn't want to ruin your big day by making a scene, would she? She squeezed Emily's shoulders harder. Emily flinched. "Oh, smile, Emily," Margaret whispered near her ear. "Smile for your father. You want him to be happy, don't you? You want him to stay healthy." The threat was explicit. Behave, or the old man dies right now. Emily looked at me in the mirror. Tears spilled over her lashes. She was paralyzed. She knew about the ticket. She knew about the poison. But she didn't know about the trap I had set. She thought she was walking us both to our execution. "Daddy," she whimpered. "I need a moment with my daughter," I said, stepping closer. "We are on a tight schedule, John," Margaret snapped. "The music is starting." "Just 1 minute," I said, putting a hand on my chest and coughing. "Please, a father's blessing." Margaret scrutinized me. She saw a weak, dying man. She decided I was not a threat. 1 minute, she hissed. She stepped back 2 paces, but her hand dropped to her purse on the nearby table. I knew there was a weapon in there. I knelt beside Emily's chair. I took her cold, trembling hands in mine. I couldn't speak freely. Margaret was listening to every breath. If I said, "I know," or "the FBI is here," Margaret would draw her weapon, and we would have a hostage situation in a confined space. I couldn't risk it. I had to use the language we built when she was a child. When Emily was 10, we used to spend rainy Saturdays building ham radios. I taught her Morse code so we could send secret messages to each other across the house with flashlights. It was our game. I looked deep into her eyes. "Emily," I said softly, "you look so much like your mother." I moved my thumb against the soft skin of her palm. I began to tap, short, long. A, long, short, short, short. B. No, that was wrong. I needed to be precise. I started over, squeezing her hand rhythmically. I paused. Emily's eyes widened slightly. She felt it. She remembered. "Trust me." I did it again, faster this time, tapping the code against her knuckles, while I continued to speak nonsense words about how proud I was. "I want you to be strong today," I said aloud. "Stronger than you think you are. Trust me." A spark of recognition flared in her eyes. The terror didn't vanish, but something else mixed with it. Hope, confusion. She squeezed my hand back. 3 short taps. S. 3 long taps. O. 3 short taps. S. SOS. She understood. She knew I wasn't just holding her hand. I was communicating. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice steadying just a fraction. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, standing up. "Now let us go. We have a walk to take." Margaret stepped forward, checking her watch. "Time to go. Daniel is waiting." She ushered us out of the room like cattle. As we walked down the stairs, I felt the atmosphere shift. The house was no longer a home. It was a staging ground. We reached the French doors leading to the garden. The music swelled, Pachelbel's canon in D. The guests stood up, turning to face us. A sea of smiling faces, unaware that they were standing in a kill zone. Daniel was waiting at the altar, standing beneath an arch of white roses. He looked the picture of the eager groom. But as I stepped into the doorway with Emily on my arm, he walked down the aisle to meet us halfway. A breach of protocol, but he played it off as eagerness. He stopped in front of us. He took Emily's hand and kissed it, performing for the crowd. Then he leaned in close to me, pretending to embrace me in a manly hug. His mouth was right next to my ear. His breath was warm and smelled of mints and whiskey. "Enjoy the walk, old man," he whispered, his voice a low hiss that only I could hear. "It is the last one you will ever take. After tonight you will be resting permanently. Do not worry about the accounts. I will spend the money for you. I'm thinking of a yacht first." He pulled back, smiling radiantly at the guests. My blood ran cold, then hot. The arrogance. The absolute unadulterated evil of the man. He was telling me he was going to kill me right here, in front of 200 witnesses, and he was smiling while he did it. I looked at him. I didn't smile back. I just stared at him with the flat, dead eyes of a shark that has just sensed movement in the water. "We shall see, Daniel," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We shall see," he laughed, thinking it was the confused rambling of a senile fool. He turned and walked back to the altar. I turned to Emily. She was trembling again. "Ready?" I asked. She looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. She took a deep breath. She remembered the taps on her hand. "Trust me." "Ready," she whispered. We stepped onto the white runner. The music reached a crescendo. The guests murmured their admiration. I walked slowly, measuring every step. With every footfall, I was not just walking my daughter down the aisle. I was walking Daniel Thorne toward his judgment day. I could feel the trigger taped to my wrist. I could feel the gun against my back. The trap was primed. The bait was taken. And as we neared the altar where Daniel stood with his triumphant grin, I knew that the next 5 minutes would burn this charade to the ground. The walk felt like an eternity. Faces blurred past me. All I could see was Daniel, the man who wanted to kill me, the man who called my daughter a cow, the man who thought he could steal the Omega key. We reached the steps of the altar. I handed Emily's hand to Daniel. He gripped it tight. "Who gives this woman?" the minister asked. "I do," I said. My voice was loud, strong. It did not wheeze. Daniel's eyes flickered with a moment of confusion at the strength of my voice, but he dismissed it. I stepped back, moving to my designated spot on the side. I was now standing exactly 3 feet from the hidden capacitor bank. I checked my sight lines. The FBI sniper was in the tree line. The florist agent was reaching into his flower basket, likely gripping a weapon. The minister began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I crossed my hands in front of me. My left hand gripped my right wrist. My thumb hovered over the pressure switch hidden in my cuff. Daniel looked at Emily. He looked victorious. "Wait for it," I told myself. Wait for the question. The air was electric. The storm was here. The silence that descended upon the garden was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. The string quartet had faded into a final trembling chord, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the weeping willows and the distant rhythmic lap of the lake water against the shore. 200 guests sat in rows of white folding chairs, their faces turned toward us like sunflowers seeking the light. To them, this was a tableau of romantic perfection. The wealthy, benevolent father, the handsome, charitable groom, and the blushing, delicate bride. To me, it was a crime scene photograph, taken moments before the blood splatter. I stood to the side of the altar, my hands clasped in front of me in a pose of respectful attention. In reality, I was shielding the view of my right wrist where the pressure trigger for the electric trap was taped against my pulse. My eyes, hidden behind the glare of my glasses, were not misty with paternal affection. They were scanning the perimeter with the cold, mechanical precision of a surveillance camera. I saw Agent Vance's men. They were invisible to the untrained eye, but glaringly obvious to me. There was the waiter near the champagne tower, his posture too rigid, his eyes constantly darting to the tree line. There was the sound engineer at the mixing board, who was adjusting knobs that had nothing to do with the audio levels, likely tuning the frequency of the directional microphones aimed at the altar. And there was the sniper team concealed in the dense foliage of the ridge overlooking the estate, their optics glinting like diamonds in the overcast light. But my primary focus was on the stage. Daniel stood center stage, his chest puffed out, radiating a toxic mix of arrogance and impatience. He looked at Emily, not with love, but with the proprietary gaze of a man looking at a deed to a property he had just acquired for a steal. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, a subtle tell that I had cataloged during my weeks of observation. He did that when he was suppressing adrenaline. He was ready to kill. Emily stood opposite him. She was trembling. It was a fine, continuous vibration that shook the lace of her veil. Her face was chalk white, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She held her bouquet of white roses so tightly that I could see the green of the stems crushing under her knuckles. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together, fragile and on the verge of shattering again. Margaret sat in the front row, directly behind Daniel. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat that obscured her eyes from the general public, but from my angle, I could see her face clearly. She was staring at Emily's back. Her jaw was set, the muscles working beneath the skin. Her right hand rested inside her open purse on her lap. I knew her fingers were wrapped around the grip of a compact pistol. She was the failsafe. If Emily ran, Margaret would drop her. The minister, an old family friend named Reverend Thomas, who had baptized Emily 22 years ago, cleared his throat. He opened his leather-bound book, unaware that he was presiding over a hostage situation. "Dearly beloved," his voice boomed, amplified by the speakers. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As the Reverend droned on about the sanctity of marriage and the enduring bond of love, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. It was the best man. He was a man introduced to us as Marcus, supposedly an old college roommate of Daniel's. In reality, my background check identified him as a mercenary named Gregor, who specialized in heavy extraction. He was standing to Daniel's left, looking solemn. But as the Reverend began the reading from Corinthians, Gregor took a half step back. He looked around the garden, feigning a cough. Then, with the stealth of a practiced thief, he slipped away from the altar party, moving backward, into the shadows of the large rhododendron bush that bordered the house. He was moving toward the garage. I glanced at my watch. It was exactly 11:15 in the morning. They were sticking to the timeline I had baited them with. Gregor was going to the garage to locate the hidden vault I had planted on the fake blueprints. He expected to find a hydraulic hatch leading to a server room. Instead, he was walking into a holographic nightmare and 400 volts of electrified mesh. I fought the urge to smile. Go on, Gregor, I thought. Go touch the light. My attention snapped back to the altar as the Reverend Thomas lowered his book and looked over his spectacles at the couple. "If there is anyone present who can show just cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together," he intoned, "let them speak now, or forever hold their peace." The silence that followed was electric. I saw Margaret tense up, her hand twitching in her bag. She was expecting me to say something. She was expecting the senile old man to make a scene, which would give her the excuse to escort me away, and likely overdose me with the potassium chloride in the privacy of the house. I stayed silent. I stood like a statue, staring straight ahead. Daniel exhaled a tiny puff of relief escaping his lips. He thought the danger had passed. He thought he had won. "Very well," Reverend Thomas smiled benevolently. He turned to Daniel. "Daniel Thorne, do you take this woman to be your wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Will you love her, comfort her, honor, and keep her in sickness and in health? And forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live." The irony of the words sickness and health hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "I do," Daniel said. His voice was rich, deep, and utterly convincing. He looked at Emily with eyes that simulated adoration perfectly. "I absolutely do." "And do you," the Reverend turned to my daughter, "Emily Williams, take this man to be your wedded husband?" The world seemed to stop spinning. Every eye in the garden turned to Emily. The birds seemed to stop singing. The wind died down. Emily did not answer. She stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the middle button of Daniel's tuxedo vest. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were shifting in their seats. I saw Agent Vance's lead waiter slowly move his hand toward the service tray, likely reaching for a concealed weapon. Daniel's smile faltered. A flicker of genuine annoyance crossed his face. He leaned in, slightly tilting his head. "Emily, darling," he whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "The Reverend asked you a question." Emily's breath hitched. It was a ragged gasping sound like a swimmer surfacing for air. She looked up, but she did not look at Daniel. She turned her head slowly, painfully, until her eyes locked with mine. The look on her face broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It was terror, pure and unadulterated. But beneath the terror there was something else, a desperate pleading trust. She remembered the code. She remembered the days in the rain building radios. She was betting her life on her father. She let go of Daniel's hand. Daniel froze. His hand remained in midair, grasping at nothing. His eyes narrowed the loving groom mask, cracking, to reveal the predator beneath. "Emily!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "What are you doing?" Emily ignored him. She looked down at her bouquet of white roses. Her hands were shaking so violently that petals were shaking loose and drifting to the floor. With clumsy, numb fingers, she reached into the center of the dense floral arrangement. She dug deep past the thorns, past the silk ribbon. She pulled out a scrap of paper. It was not a prepared speech. It was a torn corner of a napkin, crumpled and stained with moisture. On it, scrawled in thick, black, smudged strokes, clearly written with an eyeliner pencil in a moment of panic, were words I could not yet read. The crowd gasped. This was off script. This was wrong. Margaret stood up in the front row. The purse fell from her lap, revealing the grip of the gun for a split second before she kicked it under the chair. She didn't care about secrecy anymore. She was moving. "Emily is not feeling well," Margaret shouted, her voice shrill and commanding. "She needs water. Daniel, help her." It was the signal. "Take her. Now." Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Emily's arm. "You are sick, Emily," he snarled, his grip bruising her skin. "We are going inside." "No," Emily screamed. It was a sound of primal defiance. She ripped her arm away from him with a strength I didn't know she possessed, the adrenaline of survival flooding her veins. She spun around, turning her back on her fiancé, and ran the 3 steps toward me. "Dad!" she cried out, thrusting the crumpled paper into my chest. I caught her with my left arm, pulling her behind me, placing my body between her and the monster. With my right hand, I took the note. The garden was in chaos. Guests were standing up, chairs clattering over. The string quartet stopped playing with a discordant screech. I held the paper up. My eyes scanned the black smudged letters. "Dad, the vial in his pocket is cyanide. He is going to kill you tonight. Help me." I looked up. Daniel was standing 5 feet away. The mask was gone completely now. His face was twisted into a snarl of pure rage. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a ring, but for the switchblade I knew he carried. Margaret was rushing the altar, a silver dagger sliding out of her sleeve. I looked Daniel in the eye. I didn't see a son-in-law. I saw a target. "You should have taken the money, Alexei," I said, my voice cold and steady, carrying over the stunned silence of the crowd. I clenched my right fist against my hip. Click. The pressure switch in my cuff engaged. A low hum, like the charging of a massive flashbulb, emanated from beneath the floorboards. The time for acting was over. The time for judgment had begun. The crumpled piece of paper in my hand felt heavier than lead. It was a scrap torn from a cocktail napkin, smeared with the carbon of a black eyeliner pencil. But the message was as clear as a neon sign in the dead of night. I read the words, and the air in my lungs turned to ice. "Dad, the vial in his pocket is potassium cyanide. He intends to kill you tonight. I love you." I stared at the jagged handwriting. My daughter, my terrified, artistic, gentle daughter, had written these words while locked in a room with a woman who wanted her dead. She had carried the secret down the aisle, trembling not from wedding nerves, but from the sheer, crushing weight of survival. She had handed me the evidence of my own murder plot in front of 200 witnesses. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my head. The transformation was instantaneous. The stooped shoulders of the frail retiree snapped back into the rigid, upright posture of the man who had once commanded a corporate security empire. The gray makeup under my eyes could no longer hide the fire burning within them. The wheezing, the shuffling, the trembling hands. It all evaporated like mist in a gale. I was no longer John Williams the gardener. I was the architect of Aegis Dynamics, and I was looking at a dead man walking. "Stop the ceremony!" I roared. My voice did not crack. It boomed across the garden, amplified by the diaphragm of a man who had spent years barking orders over the roar of server fans. It hit the crowd like a physical wave. The guests froze. The minister dropped his book. Daniel stood there, his mouth slightly open, the mask of the doting groom slipping, to reveal the panic underneath. He saw the change in me. He saw the predator emerge from the sheep's clothing, and for the first time in 6 months, I saw fear in his eyes. He lunged toward me, his hand reaching out to snatch the note. "She is hysterical!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't listen to her! It is pre-wedding jitters. She is off her medication." He was fast fueled by the panic of a con artist watching his long con disintegrate. But he was not fast enough. I did not step back. I stepped forward. All the rage I had swallowed for half a year, every condescending pat on the cheek, every veiled threat every time he had looked at my daughter with that cold, calculating sneer, it all coalesced into a single point of kinetic energy in my right fist. I didn't throw a gentleman's punch. I threw a brawler's hook, a strike I had learned in the naval yards of Bremerton, long before I learned to code in C++. My fist connected with the bridge of Daniel's nose with a sickening crunch that was audible even over the gasp of the crowd. It was the sound of cartilage shattering. It was the sound of justice. Daniel's head snapped back violently. His feet left the ground. He crashed onto the white runner, sliding 3 feet in a tangle of limbs and blood. The perfect tuxedo was ruined. The perfect face was broken. "Stay down," I growled, standing over him like a titan. But the chaos was only just beginning. At that exact second, the ground beneath our feet shuddered. A massive, concussive boom ripped through the air, originating from the detached garage 50 yards away. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that rattled the windows of the mansion and sent a plume of black smoke billowing into the gray sky. My trap had sprung. Gregor, the best man and heavy lifter, had tried to breach the fake vault. He had touched the holographic keypad, and the high-voltage capacitors I had rigged to the conductive mesh net had discharged. He wasn't dead. I wasn't a murderer. But the explosion was a localized concussive blast designed to disorient, followed by a paint bomb that coated him in indelible, ultraviolet reactive blue dye. "Fire!" someone screamed in the crowd. "There is a bomb!" Panic, raw and unfiltered, swept through the garden. Guests were scrambling over chairs, screaming, running toward the exits. The carefully curated serenity of the wedding vanished, replaced by the anarchy of a war zone. "Nobody move!" I shouted, grabbing the microphone from the stand. "It is controlled! Stay where you are!" But no one was listening to me. They were listening to the monster on the screen. I reached into my pocket and pressed the second button on my remote. Behind the altar, the massive LED screen that had been displaying a slideshow of Emily and Daniel's happiest moments, vacations, dinners, the proposal, glitched. The image of them kissing on a beach dissolved into static. A second later, it was replaced by a grainy black and white video feed. It was the recording from the living room, time-stamped 3 days ago. The audio system, which I had secretly rerouted to bypass the mixing board, screeched with feedback before settling into a crystal-clear broadcast. Daniel's voice, unmistakable and arrogant, boomed over the garden speakers. "If the old man is stubborn, we do not kill him immediately. We take him on the wedding night. We tie him to a chair in the basement. And then we bring in the girl. The guests who hadn't fled stopped in their tracks. They stared at the screen horrified. Margaret's voice followed cold and reptilian. We make him watch. We make him watch what happens to his precious little artist until he gives up the code. Then, Daniel again. And the chip? The buyer in Dubai is offering $2 billion. $2 billion, Margaret. We can disappear. The recording looped. $2 billion kill the old man, make him watch. The truth hung in the air, naked and ugly. The guests looked from the screen to the man lying bleeding on the ground. The illusion of the charity worker, the saint, the loving husband. It was incinerated instantly. They weren't looking at a groom anymore. They were looking at a monster. Margaret, who had been sitting in the front row, realized the game was up. The moment the audio started playing, her survival instincts kicked in. She didn't look at her son. She didn't try to help him. She looked at the exit gate 300 feet away. She bolted. For a woman in her 60s, she moved with terrifying speed. She kicked off her heels and sprinted toward the side path that led to the woods. She was abandoning the mission, abandoning Daniel, and cutting her losses. "She is getting away!" I shouted, pointing at her. But I was too far away. The FBI agents, disguised as waiters, were fighting through the panicked crowd of fleeing guests. They wouldn't reach her in time. But someone else was closer. Emily. My daughter, who had spent her life painting watercolors and rescuing stray cats, watched the woman who had terrorized her, the woman who had threatened to kill her father, running for freedom. Something inside Emily snapped. The fear that had paralyzed her for days converted into pure white-hot adrenaline. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She hiked up the heavy silk skirt of her wedding dress and ran. She intercepted Margaret's path, just as the older woman reached the edge of the patio. Margaret saw her coming and reached into her bag, likely for the gun. She was too slow. Emily didn't tackle her. She threw herself into a slide like a baseball player, stealing home base. Her leg swept out, catching Margaret's ankles in a perfect, brutal arc. Margaret hit the pavement hard, face first. The sound of the impact was sickening, a wet thud that signaled broken bones. The purse flew from her hand, skidding across the stone tiles, spilling a compact Glock 19 pistol onto the grass. Emily scrambled to her feet, her dress torn and stained with grass and dirt. She stood over the groaning woman, her chest heaving. "You are not going anywhere," Emily screamed, her voice breaking. "You do not get to hurt my family." I felt a surge of pride so intense, it almost brought me to my knees. She was a Williams. She was a fighter. But the fight wasn't over. "You stupid old bastard!" The scream came from the ground behind me. I spun around. Daniel had climbed to his knees. His face was a mask of blood. His nose was smashed sideways, and his lip was split wide open. But his eyes were wide and manic. He looked like a rabid animal that had been cornered. He wasn't reaching for the note anymore. He was reaching into his sleeve. With a flick of his wrist, a blade appeared in his hand. It was a slim, double-edged stiletto, wicked and sharp. "I will kill you!" he screamed, spitting blood. "I will kill all of you!" He scrambled to his feet, swaying unsteadily. The FBI agents were closing in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Federal agents! Drop the weapon! Get on the ground!" Daniel ignored them. He knew that if he surrendered, he was finished. He needed leverage. He needed a shield. His eyes darted around the chaos. He saw me standing 5 feet away, my fists raised. He knew he couldn't take me. Not after that punch. Then he saw Emily. She was standing near the patio 30 feet away, watching Margaret writhe on the ground. She was exposed. "Emily!" Daniel roared. He didn't run at me. He sprinted toward her. "No!" I shouted, the word tearing from my throat. He moved fast, fueled by desperation. He was closing the distance in seconds. He raised the knife, aiming not to kill her instantly, but to grab her, to put the blade to her throat and demand a helicopter. "Emily, move!" I screamed, sprinting after him. But I was an old man in a heavy suit, and he was 30 and desperate. I wasn't going to make it. Emily turned. She saw him coming. She saw the blood on his face, the knife in his hand. She froze. The adrenaline that had helped her trip Margaret evaporated, leaving her terrified and vulnerable. "Come here, you little bitch!" Daniel shrieked, reaching out with his free hand to grab her hair. The distance closed. 10 feet. 5 feet. I reached into my waistband, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the Walther PPK. I drew the weapon in one fluid motion, a muscle memory from a lifetime ago. "Drop it!" I commanded, leveling the sights on his center mass. But I couldn't shoot. There were guests running behind him. If I missed, or if the bullet overpenetrated, I could hit an innocent. And he was too close to Emily now. If I shot him and he fell forward, the momentum could drive the knife into her chest. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. That hesitation cost us. Daniel grabbed Emily. He slammed into her, spinning her around. He wrapped his arm around her neck, pulling her back against his chest. He pressed the tip of the stiletto against the soft skin just below her jawline. "Back off!" he screamed, his voice shredding with hysteria. "Back off, or I open her up. I swear to God I will do it." The FBI agents froze in their tracks, their weapons trained on him, but unable to fire. The guests who hadn't fled were screaming, huddled on the ground. The garden fell silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the men with guns and the terrified sobbing of my daughter. I stood there, my gun pointed at the head of the man I had welcomed into my home. My daughter's eyes met mine over his forearm. She was choking, gasping for air, against the pressure of his arm. A single drop of blood trickled down her neck, where the tip of the knife pricked her skin. "Put the gun down, John," Daniel panted, tightening his grip. "Put it down and kick it over here. Or so help me, I will paint this white dress red." I looked at him. I saw the desperation, but I also saw the calculation. He was trying to figure out an exit strategy. He thought he still had a play. He didn't know about the boutonniere. He didn't know about the taser in the altar. But we were too far from the altar now. I had to improvise. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Okay, Daniel, you win. Just don't hurt her." I slowly lowered the gun. I crouched down, placing it on the white runner. "Kick it!" he screamed. I kicked the gun. It slid across the fabric, stopping 5 feet from him. "Good," he sneered. "Now tell your federal friends to back off. I want a car. I want the boat at the marina fueled and ready. And she comes with me." "You know I cannot do that, Daniel," I said, standing up slowly. I took a step forward. "Stay back," he pressed the knife harder. Emily whimpered. "I am just an old man," I said, holding my empty hands up. "I am unarmed. Look at me. I am helpless." I took another step. I was channeling every ounce of the persona I had built over the last 6 months. The harmless, foolish old man. "You want the chip, don't you?" I asked Softy. "The Omega key. That is what this is all about. $2 billion. Daniel's eyes flickered. The greed was still there, burning under the panic. "You have it?" he asked. "It is in my pocket," I lied. "I carry it with me. I never leave it in the vault." I slowly reached my hand toward my inner jacket pocket. "Show me," he demanded. Slowly. I reached inside. My fingers didn't find a chip. They found the remote control for the house's upgraded security system. Specifically, the button that controlled the high-intensity strobe lights I had installed in the garden landscaping for mood lighting. Lights that were currently aimed directly at the altar area where we were standing. "Here," I said, pulling my hand out with a closed fist. "It is yours. Just let her go." "Toss it," he ordered. "I will," I said. "Catch." I didn't toss a chip. I pressed the button. The garden exploded in light. 4 banks of 10,000 lumen LED floodlights, positioned at eye level, flashed on simultaneously in a blinding strobing pattern. It was like a flashbang grenade going off without the noise. Daniel screamed, blinded by the sudden searing whiteness. His head jerked back instinctively, his eyes squeezing shut against the pain. His grip on Emily loosened for a fraction of a second. "Emily, drop!" I shouted. She didn't hesitate. She went limp, collapsing to the ground, slipping out of his grasp. Daniel slashed blindly at the air where she had been, but his knife hit nothing but empty space. I didn't wait. I launched myself at him. I wasn't an old man anymore. I was a missile. I hit him with the force of a freight train, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We crashed to the ground, the knife flying from his hand. We rolled over the grass, a tangle of limbs in fury. He was younger, stronger, but I had something he didn't. I had the absolute terrifying rage of a father. I pinned him down my hands, finding his throat. I squeezed. I wanted to end him. I wanted to crush the life out of him right there on the grass. "Dad, stop!" Emily's voice pierced the red haze. "Dad, don't kill him!" I looked down. Daniel's face was purple, his eyes bulging. He was clawing weakly at my hands. I took a deep breath. I loosened my grip. "You are right," I whispered, leaning close to his ear. "Death is too easy for you." I stood up, dragging him up by his lapels. I threw him toward the FBI agents, who were now swarming us. "Get him out of my sight!" I spat. The agents tackled him, cuffs snapping onto his wrists. Margaret was already being dragged away in handcuffs, screaming curses at the sky. The noise of the sirens began to rise in the distance, a symphony of chaos, finally arriving to clean up the mess. I turned to Emily. She was sitting on the grass, her dress ruined, her hair a mess, shaking like a leaf. I walked over to her and fell to my knees. I pulled her into my arms. "I got you," I whispered, burying my face in her hair. "I got you, baby. You are safe." She sobbed into my chest, gripping my jacket so tight, I thought she would rip the fabric. "I knew," she choked out. "I knew you would save me." "We saved each other," I said, looking at the chaos around us. The screen was still playing the damning loop. The guests were slowly emerging from their hiding spots, staring at us in awe. The wedding was ruined. The garden was destroyed. My reputation as a quiet retiree was incinerated. But my daughter was alive, and the wolves were in chains. I looked at the sky. The clouds were finally breaking. A single shaft of sunlight pierced the gray, illuminating the wreckage of the altar. It was over. The nightmare was over. Now we just had to survive the aftermath. I thought it was finished. I thought the pile of federal agents on top of Daniel was the end of the story, but I had underestimated the sheer feral desperation of a rat cornered in a trap. Just as the adrenaline began to ebb from my veins, the knot of bodies on the grass exploded outward. Daniel Thorne, or Alexei, or whatever name he was using to hide his rot, was not just a con artist. He was a trained operative, and with the manic strength of a man facing life in a black site, he managed to kick one agent in the throat and shove another off balance. He scrambled to his feet, his tuxedo torn, his face a mask of blood and fury. He was panting, wild-eyed, looking for a weapon, looking for a hostage, looking for anything to extend his freedom by just one more second. He spotted me. I was standing 10 feet away, shielding Emily with my body. The FBI agents were recovering, raising their weapons, shouting for him to freeze. But they could not fire with so many civilians screaming and running in the background. Daniel saw his opening. He did not run for the exit. He ran at me. He lowered his shoulder and charged, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. He wanted to take me down. He wanted to snap my neck before the cuffs went on. He wanted his revenge for the punch, for the humiliation, for the $2 billion I had snatched from his greedy fingers. "Die, old man!" he shrieked. Emily screamed, clutching the back of my jacket. The agents were too slow. The sniper could not take the shot without risking hitting me. I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not raise my fists. I simply raised my left hand to my lapel, to the delicate white rose boutonniere that I had pinned there that morning. It looked like a simple floral arrangement, a touch of elegance for the father of the bride. But like everything else in my life, It was a lie designed to catch a liar. I pressed the hidden trigger stud located in the stem of the flower. Compressed nitrogen cartridges inside the device fired with a sharp pop, a sound like a champagne cork being pulled. Two tiny barbed probes shot out from the center of the rose, trailing thin copper wires. They hit Daniel squarely in the center of his chest, piercing the expensive fabric of his shirt and embedding themselves in his skin. I held the trigger down. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through the wires. Daniel's charge stopped instantly. His body went rigid, his back arching in an unnatural seizing spasm. His roar of rage cut off, replaced by the dry clicking sound of his teeth slamming together. His momentum carried him forward another step, but his legs were no longer under his command. He collapsed face first onto the grass at my feet, twitching uncontrollably as the current locked every muscle in his body. He looked up at me from the dirt, his eyes rolling back drool, spilling from his split lip. He was helpless. He was broken. "Stay," I said, my voice cold and final. I released the trigger. Daniel groaned a low, pathetic sound and went limp. This time, the takedown was permanent. The FBI agents swarmed in, efficient and brutal. They did not take chances this time. They flipped Daniel over, zip-tying his hands behind his back and shackling his ankles. Two agents hauled him up his legs, dragging uselessly on the grass. Across the garden, I saw another team securing Margaret. She was not screaming anymore. She was staring at me with a look of pure, concentrated hatred, her face scraped and bleeding from where Emily had tripped her. The handcuffs snapped onto her wrists with a metallic finality that sounded like music to my ears. The chaos in the garden began to settle into a stunned silence. The strobing lights I had activated earlier cut out, returning the scene to the natural gray daylight of Seattle. The smoke from the garage trap drifted overhead, a dark cloud marking the end of the battle. A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to see Chief Miller, the local chief of police, and a man I had known for 15 years. He was in full uniform, flanked by two officers. He looked at Daniel, then at me, and shook his head with a grim smile. "You really know how to throw a party, John," Miller said. He stepped forward, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He walked up to where the agents were holding Daniel. The con man was barely conscious, his head lolling to the side, but Miller grabbed him by the chin and forced him to look up. "Daniel Thorne," Miller announced, his voice booming, so that every guest, every waiter, and every spy could hear. "Or should I say Alexei Volkov, you are under arrest." Daniel blinked, trying to focus. "You are charged with 3 counts of industrial espionage." Miller read, his tone clipped and professional. "Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller continued, signaling the agents to take him away. "Though I suspect your lawyers will have a lot to say before we lock you in a hole and throw away the key." As they began to drag him away, Daniel dug his heels into the turf. He twisted his head to look at me one last time. "You are nothing," he spat, blood spraying from his mouth. "You are just a lucky old gardener. My people will find you. You cannot hide from us." I signaled the agents to wait. I walked over to him, stepping calm and steady. I stopped inches from his face. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the ozone from the taser discharge on his clothes. I dropped the voice of the frail old man completely. I spoke with the precise, icy diction of the CEO I used to be. "You still do not get it, do you, Alexei?" I whispered. "I am not a gardener, and I am not a retired engineer." I adjusted my glasses, looking deep into his terrified eyes. "I wrote the security source code for the federal Supermax prison system," I said softly. "The electronic locks, the surveillance algorithms, the isolation protocols. I built the cage you are going into, and I promise you I know exactly where the blind spots aren't. You are going to rot in a box of my design." Daniel's face went slack. The realization hit him harder than the taser. He wasn't just going to jail. He was going into my world. "Get him out of here," I ordered the agents. They dragged him away. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just stared at me as he disappeared into the back of the armored van, a man who had finally realized he had tried to rob the devil in his own house. I turned back to the altar. Emily was standing there wrapped in a blanket that an EMT had draped over her shoulders. She was shaking, her makeup streaked with tears, but she was standing tall. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Dad?" she whispered. "It is over, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms. She ran to me. She collided with me, burying her face in my chest, sobbing with a relief so profound it shook her entire body. I held her tight, resting my chin on her head, closing my eyes. I felt her heart beating against my ribs. It was the only sound that mattered. We were alive. We were together. And the threat was gone. "I was so scared," she choked out. I thought I was too late." "You were perfect," I told her, stroking her hair. "You were brave. You saved us." I looked up. The guests were gathering around us. They were shell-shocked, whispering, staring at the destruction. They saw the broken chairs, the scorch marks from the garage, the police cars. They looked at me with confusion. They didn't know the full story. They just knew their friend John had just taken down a terrorist at his daughter's wedding. I gently pulled away from Emily, keeping one arm around her shoulders. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled note she had given me. The eyeliner was smeared, but the message was still legible. I raised the paper high in the air, turning to face the crowd. "I am sorry," I called out, my voice breaking slightly with emotion. "I am sorry that the champagne is warm and the cake is uneaten. I am sorry for the fear." The crowd quieted, listening. "For months that man lied to us," I said, gesturing to the police van. "He tried to steal our home. He tried to steal my life. He thought he could fool us because we were kind. He thought we were weak." I looked at Emily, who was wiping her eyes. "But he made one mistake," I said, holding the note higher. "He underestimated my daughter." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "She found the poison," I said, my voice swelling with pride. "She found the truth. And when he had a knife to her throat, she didn't break. She fought." I looked at the guests, meeting their eyes. "This note," I said, shaking the paper. "This is not just a warning. This is a declaration of love. My daughter just saved my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the best wedding gift a father could ever ask for." For a second, there was silence. Then someone started clapping. It was Chief Miller. Then the florist agent joined in. Then the old lady from next door. Soon the entire garden was erupting in applause. It wasn't the polite applause of a wedding. It was the raucous, tearful, relieved applause of people who had just witnessed a miracle. Emily buried her face in my shoulder again, but this time she was laughing through her tears. "Come on," I whispered to her. "Let us go home." "Home?" she asked, looking at the house, which was currently being taped off as a crime scene. "Not there," I smiled. "I have a cabin in Montana. No cell service, no internet, just fishing and painting. I think we both need a vacation." "That sounds perfect," she said. I took off my ruined jacket and draped it over a chair. I took off the boutonniere with the spent taser cartridge and tossed it onto the grass. I loosened my tie. I took my daughter's hand. We walked down the aisle together, not toward a groom, but toward the exit. The sun had fully broken through the clouds now, bathing the garden in a stark, brilliant light. The white runner was stained with dirt and scuff marks, a testament to the battle we had fought. We walked past the stunned guests, past the FBI agents, taking statements, past the wreckage of the fake life Daniel had tried to build. We walked out of the garden gate and onto the driveway. Behind us, the sirens wailed, fading into the distance. Behind us, the shouts of the villain echoed in the steel box of the police van. Behind us was the betrayal, the fear, and the darkness. Ahead of us, the road was open. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. It smelled of freedom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had my daughter, I had my life, and I had a story that would keep the wolves away for a long, long time. As we stepped onto the asphalt, The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of birds singing in the returned silence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey into the dark side of trust, and the lengths a father will go to protect his child. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute at the gym or relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of John's revenge. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Calm Revenge Stories, hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little catharsis in their day. Stay safe, and remember, always check the background of anyone who tries to enter your life too perfectly.